Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream. Thank you all for joining us from wherever you are in the world. Please let us know in the chat box where you're joining us from. We are live today from Dubai, United Arab Emirates, as we take on the Azure three-part series. Today, we are kind of continuing this learning journey, and this is the second episode where we kind of talk all about exploring Azure Compute services and basically how you can scale up your applications very quickly and efficiently using Azure Compute. That being said, thank you all so much for joining us. As I mentioned, please let me know in the comments where you are joining us from. And with that being said, let's go. So, as you all know, this event is part of our Microsoft Reactor Code of Conduct. So, if you're here for the very first time, obviously we're all here to learn. So, let's be all welcoming, open to all viewpoints, respectful. The chat box is also open for you, obviously, to ask any questions or share your insights and comments as well. So, make sure to kind of be active because we love that kind of interaction as well. I will make sure to read any questions that you have or comments at the end of this stream. That being said, if you are new and you've never seen any of my streams before, to quickly introduce myself, my name is Hadeel Shubair, and I am a regional cloud advocate and data analytics engineer at Microsoft Reactor as part of the Reactor Middle East and Africa team. So where as part of like Microsoft Reactor and part of regional cloud advocates, we kind of love to share our knowledge and passion about all things tech. So I'm very passionate about kind of taking you through all the new concepts and what's new in tech, all the different products, cloud services, and all that stuff. My areas of expertise lie around specifically the topics and fields of data analytics, data science, AI, machine learning, as well as kind of exploring other tech topics that I love to always talk about and kind of co-host as well with kind of other Microsoft MVPs and cloud advocates and experts as well, such as Microsoft Azure, Internet of Things, and so many more. So as I mentioned, I'm based in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates specifically. So let me know in the comments where you are joining us from. And I am very actually passionate. A fun fact about me is I'm very passionate about kind of building communities, specifically around empowering women in tech and women in data and AI. So if you would like to kind of connect with me and stay in touch or ask any questions and stuff, your best bet is LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn handle is on the screen, Hadeel Shubair, just like my name, and my Twitter handle is @Shubair3. So make sure to connect with me. And that being said, let's get started. So, what are our learning objectives for today? What are we going to be learning in this second episode of the Azure kind of fundamentals series? So, today we will kind of be learning all about Azure Compute services, and we will kind of see how we can take advantage of several virtualization services in Azure Compute, which is part of the Azure Cloud Platform. And this, by kind of understanding the several virtualization services, you will be able to kind of understand and kind of build a framework on how you can kind of help your application scale out quickly and efficiently to help meet the demands, the increasing demands, basically. Now, what you will be learning today, we will be exploring basically the main types of Azure Compute services. So you have Azure Kubernetes, Azure Containers, Virtual Desktops, Azure Virtual Machines. You have also Azure App Services and Azure Virtual Desktops. We're going to be looking at each of these terms separately, what makes each one different from the other, and how you can basically benefit from each service and use it the right way. So that being said, let's actually jump in and get started. So if you haven't been here before and if you haven't seen the first episode of the Azure Fundamentals series, the first episode we kind of introduced all about cloud compute and kind of the world of Microsoft Azure platform, and we took kind of a tour on the Azure services. We talked about the three different services or infrastructures as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, which lie underneath the Microsoft Azure platform. So we explored these in depth and such. So, just a quick recap on what Microsoft Azure actually is. So, Azure is basically a platform for kind of cloud computing services offered by Microsoft. And basically, the amazing thing with Azure is it provides more than 600 services in its cloud computing platforms. Now, these services actually can help you build, run, deploy, and manage applications on the Azure platform, no matter what your goal is. And with Azure, as I mentioned, it offers three kind of different services. So you have infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Along with that, it even offers like machine learning and AI-based applications. So this is kind of what Azure is all about. And today we'll be exploring the Azure Compute services in Microsoft Azure. Now, before we begin, I would like to kind of to like imagine this actual scenario with me. So imagine that you've landed your dream job as a developer at a new space technology firm. On your first day, you're basically assigned to kind of help researchers, like analyze a large data set, which is being generated for kind of a cutting edge research project to explore water on Mars. And time is of the essence. But there is one conflict or one problem. You don't have any free servers to do all this work. And even if they did kind of appear, you'd kind of need to invest a lot of time to set them up and install software. So of course you could ask to buy new equipment, but your department's budget could be very tight. Plus, you don't want to buy more hardware than needed, not only because you want to kind of make a good impression with a kind of leadership, but also because you just don't know how much data will be generated and is needed by this specific project. Ideally, you would kind of obtain the resources you need to do the work without too much administration, and you simply kind of configure them to do the work. And you would pay only for basically the services or compute resources that you need while you're using them. This is exactly the scenario and what basically you can do in Microsoft Azure. We can create compute resources, configure them to do the work that's needed, and basically only follow a pay as we go model. So you pay only for what you actually need and what you actually use. So this is basically an introduction to kind of the world of Microsoft Azure Compute and how these scenarios play around this kind of term. So let's kind of take a look on the an overview of the quick Azure services that we have on the platform. As I mentioned, we have more than 600 services and in different kind of categories. So let's kind of explore them very quickly. So as you can see here on the screen in front of me, you have all the different services that are provided by Microsoft Azure that you can see. So you have platform services, you have the infrastructure services, you have the security kind of and management also services as well, and resources, and the hybrid cloud resources as well. So you have everything from compute to application to data to analytics, AI analytics, Internet of Things, as we mentioned, automation, security, really anything that you could think of from storage, database, networking, compute, and so much more. Now, our main focus, as I mentioned, is going to be compute services. This is what we'll be kind of exploring today. So if you look at the exploring in the compute services underneath the platform services, you can see that you have container services, Azure Batch, virtual machine scale sets, and development and test labs. And underneath the infrastructure services, you can see we have two compute resources or services, which are virtual machines, which are highly popular, and containers and Azure Kubernetes. So these are basically what we'll be exploring today. And in case you want to kind of have a copy of this let's say this table or chart that you have here, I have a link here for you and the link here and the QR code, which you can easily scan through your phone or any device that you have, that will take you immediately to the website that has the overview of all these Azure services, and you can kind of explore them in depth if you're interested. So either copy them, scan the QR code, or you can copy the link, which will be in the chat as well, aka.ms/overview Azure services. So have a look, explore the different Azure services, look at the different categories that you have, and see what you might be interested in exploring and learning more. Also, if you are very interested in knowing, the different pricing kind of categories for all the different Azure services you have, we Azure actually has a pricing calculator that kind of also helps you calculate your estimated hourly and monthly costs for using Azure. So this is actually a great way if you are beginning to kind of use Azure and you're wondering what the cost of each service is, then this link is actually perfect for you just to find out how much each service costs because it differs from one to another. So also I have the QR code for you to scan, and you have the link as well, which is aka.ms/Azure Price Calc. So check it out as well. It's very helpful and helps you kind of get started on your Azure journey as well. Also, if you are willing to get started with an Azure free account, and let's say you are someone who is not a student, you want to use a standard free account, Azure actually helps you start free. So you can start by getting $200 of credit to use within 30 days, so for 1 month. And while you have this $200 of credit, you get free amounts of many of the most popular services you have on Azure, plus free amounts of more than 55 services that are always free. After basically you're done with your credit, your $200 credit, you move on a pay as you go model. So you only pay for basically the resources that you're actually using. And after 12 months of that, you will still keep getting the more than 55 always free services that you have, and still pay only for what you use beyond your free monthly accounts. So that being said, kind of, try, I think it's a great way to, if you want to only kind of get started with building and exploring, all the different Azure platforms and all that stuff, you can use this link that I have on screen for you, aka.ms/Azure series, Azure sign up. And this will help you kind of try Azure for free and then only pay for what you use. So as I mentioned, it follows a pay as you go model. So there's no fee to kind of maintain basically your Azure free account, and there is no commitment that's needed. You can basically also cancel anytime. So highly check it out. It will be very useful for you to use. And then after that, you can start by paying for the Azure services that you're interested in. If you are a student, and you can use your student or university account also to have a free also Azure account as well. So by using your student account or your university account on the link that I have down below, which is aka.ms/Azure series students, you can easily create your Azure student account and also start free as well. And then after 30 days, it will still follow the same model where you go move to a pay as you go model for only the resources that you use. So highly check it out if you're only a student, a university student, high school student, and so much more. So these are all kind of free resources. So if I was you, I would kind of make a use to them and check them out because they're very extremely beneficial for you to actually get started. That being said, since I have all these links for you right now, which will be also mentioned at the end of the stream in case you missed one or two, and also we'll find them in the chat box, let's move on and kind of explore more about what Azure Compute is. So Azure Compute basically it's a compute service that is provided by Azure in Microsoft. So it's basically responsible for kind of hosting services for applications and running the application on workloads with the availability of a live kind of application. So Microsoft Azure is kind of Microsoft Azure Compute is the base of any application that is running in a real-time environment, and it's kind of also it lies around everything from deployment, testing, running, and managing your applications, and this is all done with the help of Azure Compute. So let's explore more. So as I mentioned, Azure Compute, it's an on-demand computing service that helps you run cloud-based applications. So it provides several computing resources such as disks, memory, networking, processors, or OS or operating systems, and so much more. And those resources, what I love about Azure Compute, are available on demand, and they can be made and available very quickly. So in a matter of minutes or even seconds, they can be made available. And what I love about Azure Compute is, as I mentioned, you don't have to basically pay for everything. You only pay as you go. So you only pay for the resources that you use, and based on that, only for as long as you're using them. So this is a kind of very big beneficial, um, you know, um, you know, step when it comes to Azure Compute as well. So with Azure Compute, it supports kind of a huge range of computing solutions that are used for running, managing, testing, and even deploying your applications, as well as extending your data center. And this service supports several kind of servers, such as Windows, SQL, Oracle, IBM, SAP, and Linux, and so much more. And with Azure also, it has many services that can run basically virtual machines, which we will be exploring today. And each service provides kind of different options depending on your requirements or on the demands of what you are looking for, basically. So the most kind of common or the most preferred options or services that you can find for performing compute in Azure are four, and they are listed as follows. So we have Azure Virtual Machines. These are the most popular service that you can actually that are actually used on Azure for running virtual machines. You have the second one is Azure Container Instances. The next one is Azure App Services, and the last one is Azure Functions, also known as serverless computing. So these kind of four techniques or categories are what we'll be kind of exploring more and talking about in more depth. Now, if you do have any questions so far, please let me know in the comments or in the chat box, and I'll be make sure to reply to them. So, moving forward, let's kind of all explore the Azure Compute services that we just kind of talked about. So we have different services, and each one kind of does a specific thing and is kind of has a specific target based on the requirements of what you're looking for. So just to kind of have an overview of the Azure Compute services, they are kind of categorized into 6 services that you have. So you have virtual machines, you have Azure Kubernetes Service, Container Instances, App Services, Container Apps, Azure Functions as well. And all these Azure Compute services are basically, they're the hosting services that are responsible for kind of running and hosting the application workloads of your app. So they, as you can see down below, they all fall under a specific category. So virtual machines are part of an infrastructure as a service category. Azure Kubernetes fall under the communication platform as a service kind of category, container instances, and then you have app services and container apps, which fall under platform as a service, and Azure Functions, which fall under the FaaS as a service as well. So these are the compute services, basically, just for you to get an idea. And this is basically what we'll be covering today, just for you to kind of understand the different Azure Compute services that we have online available on Azure and what each one basically can do and how it can benefit. You can benefit from kind of helping you scale up your applications quickly and more efficiently. So let's look at each one kind of in brief terms, and then explore each one in more depth. So let's start with the most common and the most popular, which is Azure Virtual Machines. Now, with Azure Virtual Machines, it's basically just like its name. So it's a service which helps you manage and deploy and run virtual machines inside the Azure Virtual Network or the Azure platform. Now, with Azure Virtual Machines, it kind of gives you the flexibility of kind of virtualization without having to buy and maintain the physical hardware that runs it. It's kind of an instance of a computer, so it does exactly what a computer does, and it can perform almost all the functions as a computer, including running the applications and even operating the systems. So this is what Azure Virtual Machines are. Let's move on to the Azure Functions. So Azure Functions is basically, it's a compute service that kind of enables users to run code without managing or kind of worrying about everything that goes on behind the scene for the platform or the infrastructure. And that's why Azure Functions is a function as a service, FaaS service. The use cases for Azure Functions kind of include like doing like these small tasks such as sending emails, notifications, you have reminders, as well as task scheduling, doing kind of database backups, notifications, and so much more. Let's move on to the Azure Container Instances. Now with Azure Containers, kind of a container, just to kind of explain briefly what a container is in simple words, basically a lightweight virtual machine. So with kind of containers, it's kind of the container instances. What it does is it's a quick and simple way that helps you run a container in Azure. And basically, you don't have to kind of set up or provision any virtual machines or even adopt a high level service. So this is where you actually focus on actually running and deploying the container in Azure. Let's move on to the fourth one, which is Azure App Services. Now, with Azure App Services, it's kind of a fully managed platform as a service for creating web applications for users and developers that can develop mobile or web applications. So it's a kind of a managed service for hosting all everything from web apps, mobile app backends, RESTful APIs, or business processes. With Azure Kubernetes Service, it is basically with Kubernetes, it is a system that kind of manages the containers. And so Azure Kubernetes is a managed service for running containerized applications. Lastly, we have the Azure Virtual Desktop, and this is basically a desktop and app virtualization service that runs on the cloud. So we will kind of be exploring these in more depth so you can kind of get a clear view and idea of the different features of each one and more. So let's start by exploring each one. We will begin by virtual machines. As I just mentioned, virtual machines, they're basically a kind of, if you would like to think of them, they are exactly an exact replica or a software replica of physical computers. So they literally include everything that a computer has, which is from memory, storage, networking, virtual processor, and even networking resources. And with virtual machines, it gives you the flexibility of kind of virtualization without having to kind of buy and worry about the physical hardware that runs it. So you can install and run software just like a physical computer. Now, some benefits of virtual machines is with Azure Virtual Machines, you can actually create, customize a software, and even use virtual machines in the cloud in Azure. It provides an infrastructure as a service and can be used in many different ways. And also virtual machines are very ideal to be used when you kind of need total control over an operating system. So whether it is you want to create or you want to use virtual machines or you want to kind of customize softwares in the cloud, then this is when you use virtual machines. Now, using the Azure Virtual Machines platform, so if you go on the Azure Virtual Machine platform, there are several things that users can actually do. So here's just some of them. Now, the first one is obviously users can create and run their own virtual machines. They can also customize their softwares in the cloud. Users can also, obviously, one of the great things is users can actually focus on working in the actual environment, but without having to worry about everything from software, logistics, and kind of all that stuff. And the capacity of the virtual machine can actually be increased based on the demand and the requirements of each client. And the clients who are actually concerned about, the privacy of the data that they can actually they have the accessibility with Azure VM on the Azure VM platforms to choose in which region they want these data servers to actually be resided at. So these are just kind of some things that that users can do with the Azure Virtual Machine platform. And obviously, I would highly recommend for you to check out the Azure platform and check out the Azure Virtual Machine kind of specific service to actually see everything else you can do. But these are kind of the main kind of, let's say, highlighted points that you can do. Now, with virtual machines come virtual machine scale sets. And basically, with virtual machine scale sets, so they are kind of a computer resource that you can use to deploy and manage, as well as run a set of identical virtual machines. So basically, with virtual machines, it's kind of with all the virtual machines, actually, they're configured the same, so they're identical, of course. The VM virtual machine scale sets are designed to support through auto scale. So they help with upscaling your applications. And of course, with virtual machine scale sets, it's kind of makes it very easy to kind of build services which are kind of targeted as like big compute, big data, AI, and big kind of workloads. And the interesting thing with virtual machine scale set is as demand goes up, you can add more virtual machine instances. However, as the demand kind of goes down, the virtual machine instances can be removed. And lastly, kind of the last thing to mention with virtual machine skill set is this process can actually be kind of manual or automated or even a combination of both depending on the requirements and basically the framework of that process. So this is what, in brief, what virtual machine skill sets are. They are used to deploy and manage a set of identical virtual machines. Containers and Kubernetes. This is something that you will hear a lot in Azure Compute, and actually, many people obviously have heard about them, but maybe don't really understand what they all are. So, containers and Kubernetes, or container instances and Kubernetes services, are Azure Compute source resources that you find available on Azure that can help you use to deploy and run and manage your containers. So, as I mentioned, Kubernetes is basically a system that manages containers. And the container is basically a very lightweight virtual machine. This is the way you can think of it. Now, to build an actual application, you kind of need to build many kind of containers all together and then use Kubernetes to manage those containers. So this is usually how it actually works. And for a fun fact, you can actually run multiple kind of instances of a containerized app on a single host machine using kind of containers and Kubernetes. So this is what it actually is. They are Azure Compute resources that you can use that help you deploy and manage your containers. With Azure App Services, the main goal of it is to help you run, create, deploy, and manage powerful and big kind of web applications, mobile applications, as well as API applications for kind of customers or employees using a single backend. And with app services, it kind of basically it builds those apps using kind of several programming languages because it's supported by multiple programming languages such as .NET, Python, PHP, Node.js, and Java as well. And with the app service, since it's kind of, it's all about deploying and managing web and mobile apps, it is obviously kind of running underneath the platform as a service offering. We have the Azure Functions, and with Azure Functions, they're also known as serverless. They're also known as serverless computing. So Azure Functions are basically serverless solutions that allow you to basically kind of focus more on writing less code and without worrying too much about the infrastructure and the platform of your application, as well as saving on costs. So the main area where you would kind of see, or use cases where you would see functions being used, is basically when you are not basically worried about the infrastructure and you only kind of are focused on writing and on the code that is running your service. So this is the main kind of area where functions are used, and functions are actually commonly used also to in response to an event or time or message. So they can be done for like small and quick tasks. As I mentioned, some use cases for Azure Functions could be like sending emails, notifications, reminders. You have scheduling of tasks, database recovery, backups, and so much more. And for a fun fact, all these Azure functions can actually be done in a matter of minutes or even seconds, so depending on what the actual task is. And with Azure Functions, you basically, as I mentioned, you kind of let Azure Functions handle everything else, but your main goal is to focus on the code that matters most to you in the most productive language for you. So be it Python, Java, C++, let's say Java as well. So whatever programming language you choose, you kind of have to just focus on the code, and Azure Functions will actually handle everything else from the running and the infrastructure and all that stuff. Now that we've kind of explored each of these kind of different services we have, let's look at each one and see when we can use, for example, Azure Virtual Machines, when we can use Azure Kubernetes and containers, when is the right time to use Azure Virtual Desktops, and all of these, services as well. So to use Azure Virtual Machines, obviously, you need to kind of create and use virtual machines in the cloud on the Azure platform. You can kind of help create, run, and even customize your softwares in the cloud. So the best time or the best use cases for using Azure Virtual Machines, so if your goal is to kind of have total control on creating and using virtual machines or the operating systems, this is when you can use virtual machines. VMs are also very ideal when you have the ability to run the custom software and to use custom hosting configurations. So everything that has to be done from, you kind of controlling the operation system and running the custom software, as well as hosting configurations, these are best used with virtual machines. Now, fun fact: when it comes to virtual machines, you actually can you have actually images, so you can create a virtual machine in kind of a matter of minutes when you select a pre-configured virtual machine image. So if you go on the Azure Virtual Machines platform, you actually can select a pre-configured virtual machine image. Once you select an image, this will help you create a virtual machine, and this image is actually a template, and it is used to create that virtual machine. Now, these templates already have kind of a back-end operating system for them, and often even other software like development tools or web hosting environments are supported by those images. So in virtual machines, you will actually realize that you can create a virtual machine in a matter of minutes or even seconds when you actually select a pre-configured virtual machine image. So here are some examples or use cases of when to use virtual machines. These are just some examples just for you to get a clear idea of when you can actually use them. So when it comes to you wanting to develop, test an application, Azure Virtual Machines offers a very quick and easy way for you to create a computer with specific configurations that help you run, deploy, and test your application. Also, another example of when you can use virtual machines are applications in the cloud. So since the demand can go up and down, and you have the demand for your application can actually at some point fluctuate, this actually might make more sense for you to run your kind of application on or virtual machine in Azure. So you can pay for kind of extra virtual machines when needed, and you can remove them and shut them down when you don't need them anymore. And another example of when you can use virtual machines is when you want to use an extended data center. So if you are having virtual machines in an Azure virtual network, this can easily be connected with the actual organization network of your organization as well. So to scale virtual machines in Azure, there are kind of several features in Azure that can help meet them. Now, these features include virtual machine scale sets and Azure Batch as well. Let's kind of explore these two terms differently. So we have virtual machine scale sets and Azure Batch as well. So with virtual machine scale set, I already kind of already talked about this briefly before. So with virtual machine scale sets, it's kind of helps you create, manage, and deploy a group of load balanced identical virtual machines. So with scale sets, the number of virtual machine instances can automatically, as I mentioned, depending on your demand, they can increase or decrease. So if there's some kind of fluctuation and such, it will kind of decrease. And it is very easy to create and manage multiple virtual machines with virtual machine scale sets. And it also allows your application to automatically scale as the resource demand changes, as I mentioned. So you can add VM virtual machine instances as you need, and you can basically simply remove them when you don't even need them anymore. This is what virtual machine scale sets are. However, with the Azure Batch is basically to put it in kind of simple words, it's kind of it enables like parallel and high performance computing batch jobs with the ability to scale to tens, hundreds, or thousands of virtual machines. Now, you might be wondering, so what does batch actually do? So when you're ready to run an application or to run an actual job or a task that you're doing, batch can actually do the following for you. It can start a pool of compute virtual machines. It can help install, staging data and applications. It can help with identifying any failures and requeuing any kind of workloads that are stopped. It can help scale down the pool as the work is complete, and it can help run jobs with as many tasks as you have. So no matter what the tasks you have, it can run those jobs very quickly and efficiently as well. So this is what Azure Batch actually is. So we looked at when we can actually use virtual machines. Now let's actually look at when we can use Azure App Service. I'm going to take a break here to let you kind of ask any questions you have until we continue. Please feel free, obviously, to ask any question in the chat box, and I'll make sure to kind of answer them and look at them by the end of the session. So when can we use Azure App Services? So as I mentioned, Azure App Services are just like its name. They enable you to basically, they kind of are all about applications. So anything from mobile apps, web apps, APIs. It kind of helps you build those apps basically in the programming language that you choose. However, without kind of having to worry about any of the infrastructure or the platform, everything that has to go behind the scenes. And with Azure App Services, it reaches as a global scale with high availability. It has a very managed production environment where you can produce and deploy your applications. It supports multiple languages from Python, Java, C++, .json, and so much more, PHP as well. And it falls underneath the platform as a service category or environment, which means it allows you to kind of focus more on everything that goes on the environment, while Azure basically handles everything from infrastructure to help you run those web applications. So this is when you can actually use app services. Now with app services, as I mentioned, you can host most common application services, and the styles that you commonly use and see are web applications, mobile applications, and APIs applications as well. And with app service, it handles obviously most of the infrastructures that you need. So you don't have to do that. You just focus basically on deploying and running your environment, while Azure App Services actually does all that work for you. Now let's look at the Azure Container Instances or the Azure Kubernetes Service. So as I mentioned, containers are basically a lightweight virtual machine, and Kubernetes are the systems that are used to manage those containers. Let's look at when we can use Azure Container Instances or Azure Kubernetes Service. So with containers, let's begin with containers. Containers are basically, if you can think of it, they work just like a kind of physical computer. They're a virtualization environment. So they kind of can run independently on any platform that you have. And you can use one of the kind of best use cases where you can actually use containers is for data processing. So if your source data is ingested and it is kind of processed and placed in a durable store such as Azure Blob Storage, this is when you can use Azure Container Instances. And with containers, you can actually quickly restart everything in case you had like let's say an error or a crash or like an interruption of the hardware. And for a fun fact, the most popular container engine is actually Docker, and this is supported by Azure by Microsoft as well. So coming with containers, you can always hear the word Docker. So Docker is actually the most popular container engine that is used by Azure. Now, to manage containers or to manage both Docker and Microsoft-based containers in Azure, you have two different types. So we have the Azure Container Instances and the Azure Kubernetes. So let's look at each one kind of differently. With containers, it is actually a platform as a service. So it has everything that allows you to upload your containers, run them, and deploy them. And it is actually the fastest and the simplest way to help you run your containers in Azure without having to manage anything from virtual machines or adopting any additional services. This is all about containers. However, when it comes to Kubernetes, this is actually where you kind of manage those containers. Now, Azure Kubernetes is kind of a complete orchestration service for containers with large volumes of containers inside. And the task of with orchestration, it's a word that's always used with Kubernetes. It's basically when you automate, manage, and interact with many complex containers. And so that is what it is. So this is the difference between kind of when you can manage containers and when you can manage Kubernetes. Now let's look at when we can, let's decide when we can actually use Azure Functions, or also known as serverless compute. So with Azure Functions, there are first of all, there's two areas or implementations of actual serverless compute. So you have Azure Functions and Azure Logic Apps. So Azure Functions, basically, it is code-based. So you basically focus on executing the code in any modern language. So Python, PHP, Java, C++, and more. So this is where with Azure Functions, you basically focus on the actual code of it. With Azure Logic apps, you actually focus more on the design of your applications. So it doesn't only focus on the code; it focuses more on everything from the environment to the designer and the editor as well. So with functions, you can select obviously a range of supported languages and multiple languages that help you to start developing and executing your code. With logic apps, it's kind of follows more of a workflow. So as I mentioned, focuses more on the web-based designer by using visual designer or an editor. And with these two, you can actually mix and match these services when you build your orchestration in Azure Functions. Now, when it comes to using the Azure Virtual Desktop, which I believe is the last type of service that we have, with Azure Virtual Desktop, it is basically a virtualization service and it basically runs on the cloud. So it kind of enables all users and developers to use kind of a cloud-based version of Windows from any location. So from wherever you are located, you can basically use a cloud-hosted version of Windows. Now, since obviously it supports a hosted version of Windows, it works across different devices such as Mac, Windows, Android, Linux, and iOS. It works with several applications that you can use to access remote applications, mobile applications, and desktops as well. And with obviously Azure Virtual Desktops, you can use most modern browsers to access it. So why you should use Azure Virtual Desktops? Now with Azure Virtual Desktops, since it's a service that basically allows customers to run virtual applications and desktop services in Azure, you can basically use it when you want to give, your team or you want to kind of provide and enhance security access to the information and application for your organization they need for their devices. So it provides the best user experience and focuses more on the actual security. So this is when you could actually use Azure Virtual Desktops. That being said, we are actually kind of done for exploring each of these services quickly. I made sure to kind of explore them in a way where you can actually understand, the basis of each of these compute services, what makes them up, what are the benefits of each services, and how you can actually benefit by using them and scaling them up once you use Azure for each of these compute services. Now, if you would like to continue actually learning, your best bet is to actually start learning or continue learning with the Azure Cloud Skills Challenge. So with Azure's Cloud Skills Challenge, this is something that I've created for all my lovely viewers we have here. So if you are someone who is looking to get into Azure fundamentals, to understand all the bases, all the different services, you would like to explore Azure in depth, you would like to be certified, or even let's say you want to get started with taking the AZ 900 fundamental certification exam, this actually is your best guide to get started. So if you scan the QR code you have with any device you have in hand, or your mobile phone or such, or even if you copy the link that I have on screen for you, aka.ms/Azure Series CSC, which is Cloud Skills Challenge, this is where you actually get access to joining the active challenge. So basically, I have listed for you some very useful and resourceful free learning modules for you to start and continue your learning journey and make your mark on the leaderboard. So I actually can see how many learning modules you've completed, and this is actually very beneficial for you. So if you're looking to be certified, if you're looking to to take the AZ 900 fundamental certification as well, this is your best start. So this is something that I would highly recommend for you to kind of start and check it out. And every single day, just maybe take an hour or so just to continue and finish these learning modules, because you would be learning at your own pace and you would be building that knowledge and having that confidence that will help you take on your next step as a developer or as a basically Azure certified, engineer and such. So join the challenge. We already have people who have joined this link from the last session. It's not too late. You have less than 1 month for the challenge to be completed. And that being said, I would highly recommend for you to check it out. So for today, we are done for today, of course. I'm just going to quickly put on the links on the screen for you and in the chat for everything that you might have missed. If you're looking to look at an overview of the different Azure services, you want to look at what services you have in Azure, this is the link aka.ms/overview Azure services. If you want to look at the pricing calculator for the different Azure services, use the link which is aka.ms/Azure price calc. If you want to get started with Azure with a free standard account, so you can start, as I mentioned, with $200 credit, and then and you can have access to obviously a lot of services, and then it starts following a pay-as-you-go model after you finish your 33 days. Use this account aka.ms slash use this link, sorry, aka.ms slash Azure Series Azure sign up. If you are a student and you want to use Azure for free as well, you have this link aka.ms/Azure Series Students, and this link is for students who want to also use Azure. They have $200 of credit and can use free services for 30 days, and then after that it will follow a pay-as-you-go model. And lastly, don't forget to join the Cloud Skills Challenge. The last link is very important. It's very beneficial for you to actually continue your learning journey in the Azure series and Azure Fundamentals series. So aka.ms/Azure Series Cloud Skills Challenges. Join now and join today, join now, start learning, and get to the leaderboard. It actually can show me who's on the first place, who's completed the most learning modules and such. So make sure to join. And that being said, we are actually done for today. So next time we have the last episode of the Azure three-part series. It's going to be the last episode. It's going to be at the 28th of March at 4 p.m. Dubai time or 4 p.m. GST. And in this last episode, we're actually going to be exploring Azure AI and machine learning. So if you're interested and you would like to continue your learning in this Azure Fundamentals kind of series, I'd highly recommend for you to stay tuned and join us in the next session. Make sure not to miss it. It's going to be very beneficial for you. So as I mentioned, March 28th at 4 p.m. GST. That being said, we are actually done for today. Thank you all so much for joining us. I am going to be going to the chat just to see if you have any questions or comments that we can answer. And then that being said, I will see you next time on March 28th at 4 p.m. Dubai time for the last session. Thank you all so much for joining us. I am going to the chat now. So I can obviously see that we don't have any questions. All is good to go. That being said, thank you all so much for joining us here. And I hope you have learned a thing or two. Please let me know if you have any questions, or obviously connect with me on LinkedIn, just like my name here, Hadeel Shubair. And I would love to answer any questions that you have. And that being said, I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you all so much, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.